Of course, the chaplains are intelligence. You know, in Nazi Germany, that you had to tell on your parents, or in the Soviet Union, they encourage you to tell on your parents. Phil Holwager, the guys who go to Yale, who become chaplains, the chaplain corps is tell all the tales on everybody. They have collections agencies. These Marines are ordered to go and collect so-and-so at so-and-so. If a Marine tells truth, if he's a whistleblower, if the wife is too much trouble, they collect them, they throw them in, they fill them full of chemicals, they'll implant little things in them. I believe that my husband has an implant. I believe George did. Now ask yourself, all right, George, I know George has had a male friend. Yeah, he has male friends, sexual. And I was told that by colonels and a captain, by a psychiatrist. Oh, all of them. If they're in special operations, if they're Marines, they're all bisexuals. They've all had to do it in order to get to be a bird colonel. The SEALs. It's kind of like the fast road to the top. I don't believe so. I haven't met one that I don't believe would have done it. And judging from what a couple of colonels told me, it's just, that's the norm. It's just you women, you know, y'all are so sissy, y'all are just, you know, you don't understand how it is. We're under so much pressure. And when Valerie Wilhelm told me that about Charlie, I just could not believe. He's a general now down in Miami. And she was just saying, oh, well, you know, he's run around. He has to, she said. He's under so much pressure. And she was saying that, of course, I had met Charlie in Norway, and Charlie is sort of someone my husband just idolizes. And and Michael O'Boyle is another one. Michael is my husband's special friend. And when my husband retired, we went to Al Gray's office. This was a traumatic thing for me. It was a really weird day. We drove up with his son Douglas and my son Garland. We went to the commandant's office. They had, you know, something to nibble on and eat, and, you know, just a little something. And his wife Jan came over from 8th and I Street, the commandant's house, with her dogs. She sleeps with stuffed animals and dogs. I don't think there's any love-making that goes on with Al Gray and his wife, quite honestly, and neither do the colonels. She is a wonderful, sweet person, scared to death. She worked for his intelligence organization, and then she supposedly took care of his mother. And then they married, you know, because he would not have made it. Everybody knew he was a homosexual, not a bisexual. This is a homosexual commandant. I talked to people who actually, one woman who went to one of the parties, she was French, and she married a naval officer. And it was when George and I were first married, and I told George about what she said about General Gray. She said, you cannot believe this man is totally debauched. This man does these group sex orgies outside of Marseille, France. He's just horrible. You know. She said, now I have to admit, I was party girl, you know, went to these parties and so forth. But what would happen is, and I met a guy in the laundromat who was very, very, he was enlisted, and he was involved in Beirut, and he knew my husband. He was going back and forth from Gaeta to the New Jersey, the ship, and then, you know, into Beirut on the beach and everything, and he worked for an admiral. Now this is a big admiral. And the admiral they would go to these parties at this big mansion outside of Marseille. what they did was they invited the wild girls, the secretaries, because this went on in Indonesia. My husband had a secretary. Anne Bouchou's husband, Hank, was sleeping with the secretary. My husband was sleeping with the secretary and Anne Bouchou. They were doing, because my husband's wife wasn't there, so they had their ménage à quatre. And of course, my husband was sleeping with Anne Bouchou, who's now, he says, a lesbian, you know, but he was sleeping with her and, you know, called her right after his wife died the night, you know. And I found the telephone numbers and, you know, her address and her birthday and all these letters.
People.
Yeah, yeah. So, but Al Gray, this guy, would guard the parties. Now, how does that make a young guy feel who's got a child? He's guarding an orgy with Israelis. There were Israelis at these parties. Intelligence people. Intelligence? There's not intelligence there. There's perversion. There's psychological, you know. These guys are abnormal. They're adolescent. They're not full, complete people. They can't have normal. Anyway. So he's guarding the parties, and he says, the secretary, the girls come in, they stay till about 11. They're all nude, all nudists. The Earls, Jim and Nancy Earl, my husband, Ty Kroll, most of the chiefs, nudists. Makes it easier, you know, to see the little, you know. But the girls, the women leave at about 11 o'clock. This is what he said. I mean, I knew the girls were there because I'd already talked to the French girl. And he said, well, you know, what they do is the women leave at about 11 o'clock, maybe 1 o'clock, and the guys all stay around there. And it's just the ritual. These are the big guys. Then I found out, because my husband would mention this guy and that guy, you know, that he went to school with. Bob Edwards is involved with this stuff. But the guy who recruited him, Charles Caddick, who was a well-known homosexual, who was the, quote, head teacher but the bodyguard for the Saudi boys. See, the Saudi boys were encouraged to do this, to corrupt them. They were corrupting Muslims who would not have done this ordinarily. The parties at Aramco, they would give the young boys, get them really drunk, and encourage Muslim sons to do this kind of stuff. And who do you think did it? Charles Caddick and Borland, these guys, Alexander Robinson, Cheeseborough, who was the headmaster. The Saudis bought Russell House at the Hun School in Princeton. They brought over Mohammed Faisal and, you know, Saud, Khalid Saud. They didn't really go to classes or whatever. And who was the young man who was partying with them? My husband, George Griggs. Who was in the group with them? Einstein. I mean, my husband was partying with Albert Einstein. I said, well, 52, 53, 54, okay. 55. I believe he said that Mohammed came over in 54. It was right after the murder, the poisoning of the one who was really good.
A young guy, 18, 19 years old?
Oh, he was only, when they first got to him, he was in high school, so he was ninth grade.
And he would be there?
He was at the school with these homosexuals. They sent his parents to California. Got him a little Boy Scout job, his father. He didn't see his parents for 8 solid years. And this is amazing. That homosexual group, bisexual group. Absolutely. Camus. Sartre. Now, Camus did not, I don't believe my husband actually met Camus, but Camus was a lover of his French teacher at Princeton. Not Todevay, not the one who helped him with this paper whom he had an affair with. And I was told that by normal roommates, whom he had later on, and by another roommate. They knew George was doing this stuff. George was, he was a cheerleader. He was a French major. Bob Edwards, who's a Marine Corps colonel, was in high school. Bob Edwards went on to Fort Benning. He was in psychological warfare. In fact, he was involved with the subterfuge in after I was injured and my husband socked me in the breast, and I had to have surgery because he'd already broken a leg, and I was starting to document the violence. But I'm such an upfront person, and all I wanted him to say was, "I'm sorry, Kay, I did this." But I was trying to do like they said Rosie Greer did. You put a mirror, if you're battering your wife, you put a mirror up in front of yourself or a photograph, and you try to imprint the lower brain, because I wanted to save his soul. I mean, this guy had murdered his first wife, battered her to death. I mean, he dragged her body back. I mean, it was just, Sue had a cerebral hemorrhage. That's too much for me to get into. But he was doing that to me, and I stopped him from drinking, thinking this would stop the battering. But I started taking notes, taping things, while he'd go in these rages, because I wanted somebody to know. I wanted somebody to help me so I wouldn't die. And I'd had surgery. I'd had broken bones. And I was trying to reach out for some help. And so I was trying to get him to realize what he was doing to me